There is a certain kind of idea that spreads quickly because it speaks directly to what people secretly want the most. The idea of fast change. The idea that something inside you can shift without struggle, without long effort, without years of discipline. The title "Listen for Just One Night, and Your Subconscious Begins to Change" carries that exact promise. It suggests that transformation is close, simple, and almost effortless. But reality is more grounded than that. The human mind does not transform in a single moment without reason. It adapts, it learns, it reshapes itself slowly through repetition, experience, and consistent input. Yet this does not mean that a single night has no value. In fact, one night can matter more than people think. Not because it completely rewires your subconscious, but because it can interrupt your current pattern. It can introduce a new direction. It can create the first moment where you think differently, feel differently, and choose differently. That is where real change begins. Most people spend years repeating the same thoughts. I am not good enough. I cannot do this. This is too difficult. Nothing will change. These thoughts do not appear once they repeat daily. And through repetition, they become part of the subconscious. So when someone listens to a powerful message, even for one night, something subtle happens. For the first time in a long time, a different idea enters their mental space. Maybe it says you are capable. Maybe it says you can improve. Maybe it says your past does not define your future. This does not erase old beliefs instantly, but it challenges them, and that challenge is important. Because the subconscious does not change when it is forced. It changes when it is exposed to new patterns again and again until those patterns begin to feel familiar. One night is not the full journey. It is the starting point. This book is not built on unrealistic promises. It does not claim that you can listen once and wake up as a completely different person. Instead, it explains how the process actually works in real life. It shows how listening can influence your mind, how your subconscious responds to repetition, how your actions either support or cancel the messages you consume, and how small, consistent changes create lasting transformation. You will not find magic here, you will find understanding. You will not find shortcuts that ignore effort. You will find methods that make effort effective, because the truth is simple. Your subconscious is always being programmed, whether you are aware of it or not. The question is not whether change is happening. The question is, what kind of change is happening? Every thought you repeat, every habit you follow, when you choose to listen to something intentional, even for one night, you are making a small but meaningful decision. You are choosing direction instead of drift, and that decision matters. This introduction is not here to convince you of something unrealistic. It is here to prepare you for something practical. Change is possible, but it is not instant. One night can begin the process, but only awareness, repetition, and action can complete it. As you move through the chapters ahead, you will start to see your mind differently. You will begin to notice patterns you never questioned before. And slowly you will understand that transformation is not about one powerful moment. It is about many small moments repeated with intention. And sometimes, it all begins. The phrase "listen for just one night, and your subconscious begins to change" feels powerful because it promises something rare. Fast transformation without long struggle. People are naturally drawn to this idea because deep down most individuals are tired of slow progress. They want to feel different quickly. They want confidence without years of self-doubt. They want focus without constant distraction. They want control without repeated failure. So when they hear that one night can begin to change everything, it creates hope. But hope without understanding often leads to disappointment. The truth is not that one night can completely transform your subconscious. The truth is that one night can interrupt your current pattern. And that interruption is more important than it sounds. Most people live their lives in repeated mental loops. They think the same thoughts every day, They react the same way to similar situations. They expect the same outcomes because their internal beliefs remain unchanged. This repetition creates stability, but it also creates limitation. Your subconscious mind learns through what you repeat, not what you wish. So if you repeat doubt, your mind becomes familiar with doubt. If you repeat avoidance, your mind becomes comfortable with avoidance. If you repeat negative thinking, your mind starts accepting it as truth. This process does not happen in one day. It happens slowly through consistent exposure, which is why change also requires consistent input. Now, this is where one night becomes important. When you listen to something different, something intentional, something that challenges your usual thinking, you introduce a new pattern into your system. For a brief moment, your mind steps outside its usual cycle. This is not full transformation. This is disruption. And disruption creates opportunity. When your usual thinking is interrupted, even slightly, your brain becomes more aware. You begin to notice your thoughts instead of blindly following them. You begin to question patterns that once felt automatic. This is the first stage of change. Many people ignore this stage because it does not feel dramatic. They expect a complete emotional shift. They expect to wake up as a new person. But real change rarely feels dramatic in the beginning. It feels subtle. It feels like a small difference in how you respond. A slight increase in awareness. A brief moment where you pause before reacting. These moments may seem insignificant, but they are the foundation of transformation. Because every lasting change begins with awareness. Without awareness, nothing changes. You continue repeating the same behaviors without noticing them. One night of intentional listening can create that first moment of awareness. It can make you realize that your thoughts are not fixed, that your beliefs are not permanent, that your current state is not your final state. This realization is powerful, not because it changes everything instantly, but because it opens the door for change. However, many people stop here. They experience that initial shift and assume the work is done. They believe the subconscious will now reprogram itself automatically. This is where the misunderstanding happens. The subconscious does not change through exposure alone. It changes through reinforcement. If you introduce a new idea, but continue living in the same way, your brain returns to its old pattern. Because your actions send stronger signals than your thoughts. If your behavior does not support the new message, your mind rejects it. This is why one night must be followed by intention. It must lead to small actions that align with the message you heard. Not extreme changes, not unrealistic expectations, but simple, consistent steps. Because consistency builds familiarity, and familiarity builds belief. Over time, what once felt uncomfortable becomes natural. That is how the subconscious changes. Not through a single moment, but through repeated alignment between what you hear, what you think, and what you do. So the real power of one night is not an instant transformation. It is in beginning a different cycle. Instead of repeating the same negative patterns, you introduce a new direction. And if you continue in that direction, even with small steps, your mind gradually adapts. This process may feel slow, but it is reliable. And reliability is more valuable than temporary motivation, because temporary motivation fades, but stable patterns remain. Understanding this protects you from unrealistic expectations. It keeps you grounded. It helps you focus on what actually works. Instead of chasing instant results, you begin building lasting change. And that shift in mindset is what makes the difference. Example. A young man has always believed that he is not confident in social situations. He avoids conversations, stays quiet in groups, and reinforces his belief through repeated behavior. One night, he listens to a message that challenges this idea. It tells him that confidence is built through action, not personality. It suggests that small interactions matter, The next day, nothing dramatic happens. He does not suddenly become outgoing. He still feels hesitation. But something is different. He becomes aware of his avoidance. Instead of completely withdrawing, he makes a small decision. He speaks one sentence in a group conversation. It feels uncomfortable. It feels unnatural. But he does it. This small action supports the message he heard. Over the next few days, he repeats this behavior. One sentence becomes two becomes a short conversation. Over time, his mind begins to register a new pattern. He is no longer someone who always avoids. He is someone who sometimes engages. This shift may seem small, but it is real, and it started with one night. Not because that night changed everything, but because that night led to a different action, and that action was repeated. That is how the subconscious begins to change. Not instantly, not magically, but practically. Chapter 2. Understanding the subconscious mind in real terms. Before trying to change something, it is necessary to understand what it actually is. Many people talk about the subconscious mind as if it is a mysterious hidden power that can instantly transform reality. This idea sounds attractive, but it creates confusion. The subconscious mind is not magic. It is a system. It is the part of your mind that stores patterns. Patterns of thinking, patterns of behavior, patterns of emotional response. Everything you repeat becomes easier for your brain to do again. This is how habits are formed. This is how beliefs are built. And this is how your personality appears consistent over time. Your subconscious is not deciding your future in a mystical way. It is simply repeating what it has learned. If you have spent years thinking in a certain way, your brain becomes efficient at producing those same thoughts. If you have reacted to situations with fear or doubt repeatedly, your mind learns that as a default response. This is not weakness. This is efficiency. Your brain is designed to save energy. It does not want to analyze every situation from the beginning each time. So it creates shortcuts. These shortcuts become automatic patterns. This is why you sometimes react without thinking. Why you feel emotions before you understand them. Why you repeat behaviors even when you know they are not helpful. This is the subconscious at work. Now, when people hear that they can listen for one night and reprogram their subconscious, they imagine replacing all these patterns instantly. But this is not how learning works. Your subconscious does not erase old patterns just because you introduce a new idea once it compares repetition. The strongest pattern wins. If you have repeated self-doubt for years and then listen to confidence for one night, your brain does not reject the old belief immediately. It simply notices a new input. For change to happen, the new input must be repeated and supported. This is where most people misunderstand the process. They focus only on what they hear, but ignore what they do. Your subconscious learns more from your actions than from your words. If your actions contradict the message you listen to, your brain follows the action. Because action is proof. If you say you are confident, but avoid every challenge, your brain records avoidance, not confidence. If you say you are disciplined, but delay important tasks, your brain records delay, not discipline. This is why listening alone cannot create lasting change. It must be connected to behavior. When you listen to something intentional, your mind becomes aware of a different possibility. This awareness creates a small gap between your usual reaction and a new choice. In that gap, you have an opportunity. You can either repeat your old pattern, or you can take a small action that supports the new idea. Each time you choose the new action, you strengthen a new pattern. At first, this feels uncomfortable because your brain is not used to it. It prefers the familiar, even if the familiar is limiting. But with repetition, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. And once something becomes familiar, your brain begins to accept it. This is how the subconscious changes, not through force, but through consistent evidence. Understanding this removes the illusion of instant transformation, but it also gives you something more valuable: control. Because now you know that change is not random. It is not dependent on luck or special conditions. It follows a process. Input, repetition, action, reinforcement. One night of listening is input. Repeated listening is reinforcement. Aligned action is proof. When these three work together, change becomes natural. Without action, listening fades. Without repetition, action feels temporary. Without input, there is no direction. All three are necessary. This is why some people feel motivated after listening to something, but lose that feeling quickly. They experienced input without reinforcement. Motivation is a temporary emotional state. Patterns are long-term structures. To change patterns, you need consistency. This does not mean extreme effort. It means steady effort. Small actions repeated regularly. Because your brain responds more to consistency than intensity. Doing something small every day creates stronger patterns than doing something extreme once. So instead of expecting one night to change everything, you begin to see it as the beginning of a process. A process that you can guide. Once you understand how your subconscious actually works, you stop depending on motivation alone and start building systems that support change. This shift in understanding is what makes progress sustainable. Example: a person believes they are not good at waking up early. They have tried many times, but always return to their old habit of sleeping late and waking up late. One night they listen to a message about discipline and routine. The message suggests that identity is built through small repeated actions. The next morning they do not attempt to wake up extremely early. Instead, they wake up just 15 minutes earlier than usual. It feels slightly uncomfortable but manageable. This small action supports the idea they heard. The next day, they repeat it. And then again. After a few days, waking up earlier begins to feel less difficult. Their mind starts recognizing a new pattern. They are no longer someone who always sleeps late. They are someone who can adjust. Over time, they gradually increase the change. This process continues until waking up early becomes natural. The transformation did not come from one night alone. It came from understanding the process and repeating aligned actions. That is how the subconscious mind changes. In Real Terms, Chapter 3. The Role of Nighttime in Mental Conditioning. Nighttime has always been seen as a special period for the mind. A quiet phase where the outside world slows down and your internal world becomes more noticeable. This is not just a feeling. There is a real shift happening in your brain during this time. Throughout the day, your mind is active, alert, and constantly filtering information. You are thinking, analyzing, reacting, and making decisions. Your conscious mind is in control most of the time. But as night approaches, your mental state begins to change. Your brain starts to slow down. Your thoughts become less structured. Your awareness turns inward. This transition creates a different kind of mental environment. One where your usual resistance is reduced. During the day, when you hear something new, your mind immediately questions it. It compares it with your existing beliefs. It accepts or rejects it based on what feels familiar. But at night, especially just before sleep, this filtering process becomes weaker. Your mind is less focused on analysis and more open to suggestion. This is why what you expose yourself to at night matters. Because your brain does not treat all moments equally. Some moments are more receptive than others. Nighttime is one of those moments. However, this does not mean your mind becomes completely unprotected or easily controlled. It simply means that your guard is lower. There is a difference between influence and control. What you listen to at night can influence your thoughts and emotional state, but it does not automatically create permanent change. This is where many misunderstand. They believe that because the mind is more open at night, it can be fully reprogrammed in a single session. But openness only allows entry. It does not guarantee retention. For something to stay, it must be repeated. Your brain processes information during sleep. It organizes experiences, strengthens certain connections, and weakens others. This process is part of how learning happens. So when you listen to something intentional before sleep, your brain does continue working on that input. This is why you may wake up feeling slightly different, sometimes more calm, sometimes more motivated, sometimes more focused. But this effect is temporary, if not reinforced. Because your brain also processes everything else in your life, your habits, your environment, your daily actions. If those remain unchanged, they continue to strengthen old patterns. So nighttime listening should not be seen as a complete solution. It should be seen as a supporting tool, a way to guide your mind in a certain direction. The real change still depends on what happens during the day. If your daytime behavior aligns with what you listen to at night, the effect becomes stronger. If it does not align, the effect fades. This connection between night and day is important, because many people separate them. They listen to something positive at night, but live the next day in the same negative patterns. This creates conflict in the mind. Your brain receives two different signals, one from listening, one from action, and in most cases, action becomes stronger, because it involves real experience. So if you want nighttime conditioning to work, it must be connected to your daily behavior. Even small alignment makes a difference. You do not need to change everything at once. You only need to support the message with one or two actions. This creates consistency. And consistency is what the subconscious responds to. Over time, your brain begins to associate the night input with daytime evidence. This strengthens the new pattern. Another important aspect of nighttime is emotional state. Before sleep, your emotions tend to settle. You are less distracted, more reflective. This makes it easier to connect with what you are hearing. When emotion and input combine, the effect becomes deeper, because your brain remembers emotional experiences more strongly than neutral ones. So if you listen to something that creates a sense of belief, calm, or determination, it leaves a stronger impression. But again, impression is not transformation. It is the beginning of a shift. Real change still requires repetition and action. Understanding this helps you use nighttime effectively. Instead of expecting immediate results, you start building a routine, a pattern of intentional input followed by aligned behavior. This combination creates gradual but stable change. And that is what lasts. Example: a person struggles with overthinking, especially at night. Their mind keeps repeating worries and negative scenarios. This pattern has been built over time through repeated thinking. One night they decide to listen to a calming and structured audio before sleep. The audio guides their thoughts away from worry and towards clarity. That night they feel more relaxed. Their mind slows down. They sleep better. The next day the overthinking is still present, but slightly reduced. Instead of ignoring this small change, they support it. Whenever they notice overthinking, they pause and redirect their thoughts, just like they heard at night. They repeat the night listening again, and continue the daytime practice. Over several days, the intensity of overthinking begins to decrease. Their mind starts learning a new response. This change did not happen in one night, but one night created the first interruption in the pattern. And that interruption was reinforced through repetition and action. That is how nighttime plays a role in mental conditioning. Chapter 4. The power of repetition in reprogramming the mind. If there is one principle that truly controls how the subconscious mind changes, it is repetition. Not intensity, not emotion alone, not a single powerful moment, but repetition. The human brain is designed to learn through repeated exposure, This is how you learn to speak. This is how you learn to walk. This is how you developed habits that now feel automatic. Anything repeated enough times begins to feel normal. And once something feels normal, your brain stops questioning it. This is exactly how beliefs are formed. A belief is not always a fact. It is often just a thought that has been repeated so many times that your mind accepts it as truth. If someone keeps thinking, "I am not capable," again and again, their brain begins to treat that thought as reality, not because it is proven, but because it is familiar. Familiarity creates acceptance. This is why one night alone cannot fully reprogram your subconscious, because one night is not repetition, it is introduction. It introduces a new idea, but it does not establish it. For an idea to become a belief, it must be repeated, and not just heard, but experienced. This is where most people lose progress. They listen once, feel inspired, and then stop. Their brain receives a new idea, but does not receive it again. So it returns to what it already knows. The old pattern remains stronger. This does not mean that the first night was useless. It simply means it was incomplete. Repetition is what completes the process. When you repeat a message, your brain starts paying more attention to it. It begins to recognize it as important. Over time, this repeated input starts competing with your old patterns. At first, the old pattern is stronger because it has more history. But with consistent repetition, the new pattern begins to grow, slowly, almost unnoticeably, until one day it starts influencing your reactions. This is when change becomes visible. Many people expect to feel different immediately, but repetition works in the background. It builds structure before it shows results. This is similar to physical training. If you exercise once, you do not see a major change. But if you repeat the same action over weeks, your body adapts. The same principle applies to the mind. Mental patterns strengthen through use. So when you listen to something intentional every night, you are not just hearing it, you are reinforcing it. Each repetition makes the idea more familiar, and each moment of familiarity reduces resistance. Eventually, what once felt new starts to feel natural. This is when your subconscious begins to accept it. But repetition alone is still not enough, because your brain also observes your actions. If your actions support it, even in small ways, the process accelerates. This is because your brain now receives the same message from two directions: input and experience. This combination is powerful. It tells your mind that this is not just something you hear, it is something you do. And what you do defines what you become. Another important part of repetition is patience. Because repetition requires time. There is no exact number that guarantees change. It depends on how strong your previous pattern is, and how consistently you apply the new one. Some changes happen relatively quickly, others take longer. But the process remains the same: consistent repetition with aligned action. This is not exciting in the beginning because it feels slow, but it is reliable, and reliability is what creates lasting results. People often look for shortcuts because repetition feels simple, almost too simple, but simple does not mean ineffective. In fact, the simplest principles are often the most powerful, because they work in all situations. Once you understand repetition, you stop searching for quick fixes and start building consistent patterns. This shift changes how you approach growth. You no longer depend on motivation, you depend on structure. You no longer expect one night to change everything you use each night as part of a sequence that builds over time. And as this sequence continues, your subconscious begins to adapt, not suddenly, but steadily. Not dramatically, but permanently. Example: a person wants to develop a habit of positive thinking. For years they have focused on negative outcomes, and this has become automatic. One night, they listen to a message about shifting focus towards solutions instead of problems. They feel motivated, but the next day, they notice their thoughts returning to negativity. Instead of giving up, they repeat the process. They listen again the next night. And during the day, whenever they notice a negative thought, they pause and replace it with a more balanced one. This feels unnatural at first. Their mind resists it, but they continue. Each night they reinforce the idea. Each day they support it with small actions. After several days, they begin to notice a slight difference. They still have negative thoughts, but they catch them faster. After a few weeks, the pattern becomes stronger. Their default thinking starts to shift. They no longer focus only on problems. They begin to consider solutions automatically. This change did not come from one night. It came from repetition. The first night introduced the idea. The following nights strengthened it. And their daily actions confirmed it. That is how repetition reprograms the subconscious mind. Chapter 5. The connection between thoughts and actions. One of the biggest misunderstandings about changing the subconscious mind is the belief that thoughts alone are enough. People often assume that if they listen to positive messages or repeat certain ideas in their mind, then their life will automatically begin to change. But the reality is different. Your subconscious does not respond strongly to words alone. It responds to evidence. And the strongest form of evidence is action. Your thoughts can suggest a direction, but your actions confirm it. If there is a conflict between what you think and what you do, your brain follows what you do, because action creates real experience. Experience is what your mind trusts. This is why many people feel motivated after listening to something powerful, but see no long-term change. They change their thoughts for a short time, but their behavior remains the same. So their subconscious receives two different signals, one temporary and one consistent. And the consistent one always wins. Understanding this changes how you approach reprogramming your mind. Instead of trying to force yourself to believe something new immediately, you begin to focus on acting in alignment with the idea, even if the belief is not fully there yet. This may feel strange at first, because people often think that action should come after belief. But in many cases, belief comes after action. Your brain needs proof before it fully accepts something. So when you take a small action that supports a new idea, you give your mind a reason to consider it. Each action becomes a signal that says this is possible, this is real, this is happening. Over time, these signals accumulate, and your subconscious begins to update its patterns. This process is practical and grounded. It does not rely on imagination alone. It relies on experience. For example, if you want to become more confident, thinking about confidence is not enough. You need to act in ways that reflect confidence, not extreme actions, not unrealistic steps, but small, consistent behaviors. Because your brain does not require perfection, it requires repetition. Each time you act differently, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. This is how real change happens. Listening at night introduces the idea, but action during the day builds the identity. Without action, the idea remains theoretical. With action, it becomes practical. This is also why waiting to feel ready often leads to no progress, because readiness is not a fixed state. It develops through doing. If you wait until you feel completely confident before taking action, you may wait indefinitely. But if you act despite discomfort, you create the conditions for confidence to grow. This is not easy in the beginning, because your mind prefers familiarity. It wants to stay within patterns it already knows, even if those patterns are limiting. So when you try to act differently, you may feel resistance. This resistance is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are doing something new. And new actions always feel uncomfortable at first. But discomfort is temporary, patterns are lasting. If you repeat the new action enough times, it becomes familiar. And once it becomes familiar, your brain accepts it. This is when the subconscious begins to align with your intention. Another important point is that actions do not need to be large to be effective. Small actions are often more powerful because they are easier to repeat, and repetition is what creates change. Trying to make extreme changes can lead to inconsistency, but small steps create stability, and stability leads to progress. So instead of trying to change everything at once, you focus on one or two actions that support your goal. You repeat them daily and gradually expand. This creates a strong foundation. When your thoughts and actions begin to align, your mind experiences clarity. There is no conflict. This clarity strengthens your belief system and makes change feel natural instead of forced. This is the point where reprogramming becomes visible, not because of a single moment, but because of consistent alignment. Example: a person believes they are not disciplined. They often delay important tasks and feel frustrated with themselves. One night they listen to a message about discipline being built through small, consistent actions. The next day, they do not try to completely change their routine. Instead, they choose one task they have been avoiding. They set a simple goal to work on it for a short period. They complete it. This action is small but important. It gives their brain a new piece of evidence. The next day, they repeat the process with another task. They continue listening at night and acting during the day. Over time, these small actions begin to change their pattern. They start seeing themselves as someone who can take action. Their belief begins to shift, not because they forced themselves to think differently, but because they repeatedly acted differently. This is how thoughts and actions work together. Listening creates awareness. Action creates proof. And proof is what the subconscious accepts. That is how real and lasting change begins. Chapter 6. Breaking old patterns and creating new ones. Every person who wants to change their life eventually faces the same challenge: old patterns. These patterns are not always visible. They operate quietly in the background, guiding your thoughts, decisions, and reactions. You may decide to change. You may feel motivated. You may even start strong. But after some time, you find yourself returning to the same behaviors. This is not because you lack ability. It is because your old patterns are still active. The subconscious mind is designed to preserve what is familiar. It prefers stability over change. Even if your current habits are limiting, they feel safe because they are known. This is why breaking old patterns feels difficult. You are not just changing behavior. You are challenging something your brain has accepted as normal. And anything that challenges normal creates resistance. This resistance can appear in different forms. You may feel hesitation. You may feel doubt. You may feel a lack of energy or motivation. Sometimes you may even create excuses without realizing it. These are not random reactions. They are protective responses. Your brain is trying to keep you within the patterns it understands. But growth requires moving beyond those patterns. This is where awareness becomes important again, because you cannot change what you do not recognize. Once you become aware of a pattern, you create a gap between the pattern and your response. In that gap, you have a choice. You can follow the old pattern, or you can introduce a new one. This choice may seem small, but it is powerful. Because each time you choose differently, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. This is how patterns change, not by removing them instantly, but by replacing them gradually. Many people make the mistake of trying to completely eliminate an old habit at once. They expect immediate control, but this often leads to frustration, because the old pattern is still strong. A more effective approach is substitution. Instead of focusing only on stopping a behavior, you focus on replacing it with another. This gives your brain a new direction, because the mind does not function well in empty space. If you remove a pattern without replacing it, your brain tends to return to the old one. But if you introduce a new pattern, you give it something else to follow. This process requires repetition. The new pattern must be practiced consistently, even when it feels uncomfortable, because discomfort is part of change. Your brain is adjusting, and adjustment takes time. This is where night listening can support the process. When you listen to intentional messages before sleep, you remind your mind of the new direction. You reinforce the idea you are trying to build. This makes it easier to recognize the old pattern during the day, and slightly easier to choose differently. But again, listening alone is not enough. It must be combined with action. Each time you act in alignment with a new pattern, you strengthen it. Over time, the new pattern becomes more familiar, and the old one becomes weaker. This does not mean the old pattern disappears completely. It means it loses control. You gain the ability to choose instead of react automatically. This is real progress. Another important part of breaking patterns is patience. Because patterns are built over time, and they require time to change. Expecting immediate results can lead to discouragement. But understanding the process helps you stay consistent. Instead of asking, why is this not changing quickly? You begin to focus on whether you are repeating the new behavior. Because repetition is what creates results, it is also important to recognize that small changes matter. You do not need to completely transform your behavior in one step. Even a slight shift is progress, because it creates movement. And movement leads to momentum. Momentum makes future change easier. This is how gradual transformation happens. Not through one big action, but through many small ones. Each one building on the previous, until the new pattern becomes your default. And when something becomes your default, it becomes part of your subconscious. This is the goal. Not forcing change, but creating it through consistent practice. Example. A person has a habit of checking their phone constantly whenever they feel bored or uncomfortable. This pattern has been repeated so many times that it feels automatic. One night, they listened to a message about focus and intentional behavior. The next day, they noticed their habit more clearly. Instead of trying to stop it completely, they introduce a small change. Whenever they feel the urge to check their phone, they pause for a few seconds. Sometimes they still check it, but sometimes they choose to do something else. This pause becomes their new pattern. They repeat it over several days. Each time they pause, they weaken the automatic reaction and strengthen awareness. Gradually, they replace some of those moments with more intentional actions. Reading, writing, or simply sitting without distraction. Over time, the urge becomes less dominant. They are no longer reacting automatically. They are choosing. This change did not happen instantly. It happened through awareness, repetition, and substitution, supported by consistent reminders. That is how old patterns are broken, and new ones are created. Chapter 7. Why motivation fades and discipline builds change. One of the most common experiences people face when trying to improve themselves is this. They feel highly motivated for a short period of time. They start with energy, focus, and excitement. They believe this time things will be different. But after a few days or weeks, that motivation begins to fade. Their energy drops, their consistency breaks, and slowly they return to their previous patterns. This cycle repeats again and again. And over time, it creates frustration. Many people start believing that something is wrong with them. But the problem is not personal weakness. The problem is misunderstanding motivation. Motivation is not designed to last. It is a temporary emotional state. It rises when something inspires you, and falls when that feeling fades. So if your progress depends only on motivation, your progress will always be unstable. This is where discipline becomes important. Discipline is different from motivation. Motivation is based on how you feel. Discipline is based on what you do. Motivation says, act when you feel ready. Discipline says, act even when you do not feel ready. This difference changes everything. Because consistency is what creates change, not temporary effort. When you rely on motivation, you take action only during certain moments. But when you rely on discipline, you create a pattern of action. And patterns are what the subconscious mind learns from. This is why discipline is more powerful than motivation. It creates repetition, and repetition builds new mental structures. Many people avoid discipline because they think it requires extreme effort. But real discipline is not about forcing yourself constantly. It is about creating simple rules and following them consistently. Small actions repeated daily, even when you do not feel like doing them, especially when you do not feel like doing them. This is what strengthens your control. Every time you act despite low motivation, you send a signal to your brain. You are not dependent on emotion. You are capable of consistency. This signal builds confidence, not the type of confidence based on feeling good, but the type based on evidence. Evidence that you can follow through. This is much stronger, because it does not disappear when your mood changes. Night listening often creates motivation. You hear something powerful. You feel inspired. You believe you can change. This is useful, but only as a starting point. If you do not convert that motivation into disciplined action, it fades without impact. So the real goal is not to stay motivated. The goal is to build discipline. To take the feeling you get from listening and turn it into a small, consistent behavior. Something you repeat daily. This is how you make the effect last. Another important point is that discipline reduces decision-making. When you rely on motivation, you keep asking yourself, do I feel like doing this today? This question creates inconsistency. But when you build discipline, you remove that question. You decide once, and then you follow the decision. This makes action easier, because you are not negotiating with yourself every day. Over time, this becomes automatic, just like any other habit. Your brain begins to expect the action, and when something becomes expected, it becomes easier to perform. This is when discipline starts feeling natural, not forced. This shift is important, because it means you are no longer depending on temporary emotions. You have built a structure, and structure creates stability. Stability leads to long-term progress. This is what actually changes your subconscious. Not a single moment of inspiration, but repeated actions guided by discipline. Motivation may start the process, but discipline completes it. Understanding this protects you from disappointment. You stop expecting yourself to feel motivated all the time, and start focusing on what you can control, your actions. This creates a sense of responsibility. And responsibility creates power, because now your progress is not dependent on how you feel. It is dependent on what you do, and what you do can be trained. Just like any other skill. Example. A person decides to improve their physical health. One night they listen to a powerful message about taking control of their life. They feel motivated and decide to start exercising. For the first few days they are consistent. Their motivation is high. But after a week they start feeling tired. They lose interest. And skipping one day turns into skipping several days. This is where they usually stop. But this time they change their approach. Instead of waiting to feel motivated again, they create a simple rule. They will exercise for a short fixed time every day, regardless of how they feel. Some days they feel energetic, some days they do not. But they follow the rule. The effort is not always perfect, but the consistency remains. Over time, this routine becomes part of their daily life. They no longer rely on motivation. They rely on discipline. Their subconscious begins to accept this pattern. They become someone who exercises regularly. This identity is built through repeated action, not through temporary inspiration. That is the difference between motivation and discipline. And that is what creates lasting change. Chapter 8. The role of environment in shaping your subconscious. When people think about changing their mindset, they often focus only on their thoughts. They try to think differently. They try to feel differently. They try to motivate themselves internally. But they ignore one of the strongest influences on the subconscious mind: their environment. Your environment is not just the place where you live. It includes everything around you: the people you interact with, the content you consume, the conversations you hear, the habits you see repeated daily. All of these constantly send signals to your brain, and your subconscious absorbs these signals without effort. This is important to understand, because your mind does not develop in isolation. It adapts to what it is exposed to. If you are surrounded by negativity, your thinking slowly becomes negative. If you are surrounded by distraction, your focus becomes weaker. If you are surrounded by discipline and growth, your mindset begins to shift in that direction. This happens gradually, often without you realizing it. This is why some people struggle to change, even when they are trying. They are working, but during the day, they are surrounded by patterns that contradict it. This creates conflict. Your brain receives mixed signals. One signal says grow, another says stay the same, and the stronger signal usually comes from what you experience repeatedly, not what you hear once. This is why environment matters. It either supports your change or slows it down. This does not mean you need a perfect environment, but it does mean you need an intentional one. Small adjustments can make a big difference. For example, the content you consume daily has a direct impact on your thinking. If you spend hours consuming negative or distracting content, your mind adapts to that pattern. Your attention becomes scattered. Your thinking becomes reactive. But if you replace some of that input with something constructive, your mind begins to shift. Not instantly, but gradually. The same applies to people. The individuals you spend time with influence your perspective. Their habits, their attitudes, their expectations all affect how you see yourself and the world. If you are constantly around people who limit themselves, you may begin to accept those limits as normal. But if you are around people who take action and improve consistently, you begin to see that as possible. This does not mean you must change everyone around you, but you must become aware of the influence, and where possible balance it. Another aspect of environment is physical space. Your surroundings can either support your focus or distract you. A cluttered, disorganized space can make it harder to concentrate, while a simple, organized space can make action easier. This may seem small, but small factors repeated daily create patterns. Your brain responds to cues. If your environment constantly signals distraction, your behavior follows. If it signals focus and intention, your behavior begins to align. This is why creating a supportive environment is part of reprogramming your subconscious. It reduces resistance. Instead of relying only on willpower, you create conditions that make the desired behavior easier. This increases consistency, and consistency leads to change. Night listening becomes more effective when your environment supports it, because the message you hear is not being canceled during the day. It is being reinforced. This alignment between input and environment accelerates the process. Another important point is that environment includes your digital space. What you see on your phone, what you read, what you watch, all of it contributes to your mental patterns. If your digital environment is filled with distraction, your mind becomes conditioned for short attention. If it is filled with meaningful content, your thinking becomes more focused. This is not about perfection. It is about direction. Even small changes in what you consume can influence your mindset over time. Understanding this gives you more control. Because now you are not trying to change only from the inside. You are also adjusting what surrounds you. This creates a stronger system, one that supports your goals instead of working against them. Real change becomes easier when your environment and your intention move in the same direction. Instead of constantly fighting resistance, you begin to reduce it. And when resistance is reduced, consistency improves. This is how the subconscious adapts more effectively. Not through isolated effort, but through aligned influence. Example: a person wants to develop a habit of studying regularly. They listen to motivational content at night and feel inspired. But during the day, their environment is filled with distraction. Their phone constantly pulls their attention. Their surroundings do not support focus. They struggle to stay consistent. Instead of relying only on motivation, they make small changes to their environment. They create a specific place for studying. They reduce distractions by limiting unnecessary phone use during that time. They surround themselves with materials related to their goal. These changes are simple, but they create a different signal. When they sit in that space, their mind begins to associate it with focus. Combined with night listening, this reinforces the pattern. Over time, studying becomes easier, not because they forced themselves constantly, but because their environment supported the behavior. This is how environment shapes the subconscious, quietly, consistently, and powerfully. Chapter 9. Emotional imprints and how the subconscious learns from feelings. To understand how the subconscious mind changes, you must understand one more powerful force: emotion. Because your mind does not only learn from what you hear or what you do, it learns deeply from how you feel during those experiences. Emotion is what gives meaning to information. Without emotion, a message is just words. With emotion, it becomes a memory pattern. This is why some experiences stay with you for years, while others are forgotten quickly. Your subconscious stores emotional experiences more strongly than neutral ones. If something makes you feel fear repeatedly, your mind learns to avoid it. If something makes you feel confident repeatedly, your mind learns to seek it. This is how emotional conditioning works. It is not instant. It builds over time through repeated emotional exposure. This is also why many limiting beliefs feel so real. They are not just thoughts. They are thoughts connected to emotion. When a thought is repeated alongside strong emotion, it becomes deeply embedded. For example, if someone repeatedly feels failure during attempts at something new, their mind starts linking that activity with emotional discomfort. Over time, even thinking about that activity can trigger hesitation. This is the subconscious responding to emotional memory. Now, when people listen to motivational or subconscious reprogramming content at night, they often experience emotion. They may feel hope, relief, motivation, or calmness. These emotions are important because they help the message enter deeper awareness. But emotion alone is not enough, because emotions fade. What remains is what is reinforced. If the emotional experience is not supported by real-life action, it becomes temporary. This is why some people feel inspired at night, but return to old patterns during the day. The emotional state changes, but the underlying behavior does not. For lasting change, emotion must be connected to action. When you feel something and then act in alignment with it, the emotional imprint becomes stronger. Your brain begins to associate the emotion with behavior. This is how identity starts forming. You do not just think you are different. You begin to feel it through repeated experience. This combination of thought, emotion, and action is what rewires subconscious patterns. Another important aspect is that emotions act as signals for importance. Your brain pays more attention to emotionally charged experiences because they are considered significant for survival and learning. This is why emotional moments are remembered more clearly. So when you introduce new ideas during emotionally receptive moments, such as before sleep, you increase the chance of retention. But again, retention is not transformation. It is storage. For transformation, you need repetition and reinforcement. Emotion can open the door, but repetition keeps the door open. This is why relying only on emotional motivation is not stable. Emotions change quickly. One day you feel strong. Another day you feel low. If your progress depends only on emotional states, your progress becomes unstable. But when emotion is combined with discipline and repetition, it becomes powerful. Because now, you are not waiting to feel good. You are using how you feel as a signal to act. Even small actions taken during emotional states matter, because they connect feeling with behavior. Over time, this connection becomes stronger than the emotion itself, and your subconscious begins to respond automatically, not based on random feelings, but based on learned patterns. This is when real internal change begins. Another important point is emotional contrast. Your brain learns strongly when there is a difference between old emotional patterns and new ones. For example, if someone used to feel stress during a certain situation, but begins to act differently and experiences less stress, that contrast creates awareness. Your mind notices the change and begins updating its understanding. This is how emotional patterns shift. Not by removing emotions instantly, but by changing the response over time. So instead of reacting the same way every time, you begin to respond differently. This repeated difference creates a new emotional baseline. And that new baseline becomes your subconscious default. Example: a person has always felt anxious when speaking in front of others. This anxiety is not just thought-based. It is emotional and physical. One night they listen to a message that encouraged calmness and self-trust. They feel relaxed and hopeful. The next day, they are still nervous, but they decide to speak briefly in a small situation. They feel discomfort, but also a small sense of control afterward. This new emotional experience is slightly different from the past. They repeat this process over time, listening at night, acting in small ways during the day. Each time the emotional intensity reduces slightly, and confidence begins to replace anxiety. Eventually, their subconscious no longer associates speaking with fear, but with manageable experience. This change did not come from emotion alone, and not from action alone, but from the combination of both, repeated over time. That is how emotional imprints shape and reshape the subconscious mind. Chapter 10. Identity change, the deepest level of subconscious reprogramming. Every attempt to change your life eventually reaches a deeper question. Not what you want to do, but who you believe you are. This is where real subconscious transformation begins. Because your identity is the strongest program in your mind. It is the set of beliefs you hold about yourself that quietly controls your choices without constant awareness. You may think you are making decisions freely, but many of those decisions are filtered through identity. For example, if someone believes they are not disciplined, they will naturally avoid actions that require discipline. If someone believes they are not confident, they will avoid situations that require confidence. If someone believes they are not capable, they will unconsciously limit their effort. This happens automatically, not because they are choosing limitation, but because they are acting according to identity. Identity acts like a lens through which you interpret reality. It decides what feels possible and what feels impossible. This is why surface-level change is often temporary. You can change habits for a short time. You can force new behaviors. You can even stay consistent through motivation. But if your identity does not change, your old patterns eventually return. Because your mind always tries to align behavior with self-image. This is the core reason why one night listening alone cannot permanently transform a person. It can introduce new ideas. It can create awareness. It can even inspire action. But identity change requires repeated proof. Your subconscious does not accept a new identity. Because you heard it once, it accepts it when your actions repeatedly support it. This is the process of becoming. You do not instantly become disciplined, confident, or focused. You gradually behave like someone who is. And over time, your mind updates its definition of you. This is the real reprogramming, not replacing thoughts alone, but reshaping identity through evidence. Each time you act differently from your old identity, you create a small contradiction in your subconscious. For example, if you believe you are lazy, but you complete a task, you introduce new evidence. Your mind notices this contradiction. At first, it does not fully accept it. But repeated contradictions weaken the old identity and strengthen the new one. This is how identity slowly shifts, not through declaration, but through demonstration. This is why actions are more important than affirmations alone. Affirmations can guide direction, but actions define reality. When your behavior consistently matches a new version of yourself, your brain begins to accept it as truth. This is when identity change starts becoming permanent. Another important part of identity transformation is consistency. This is how long-term change is built, through repetition under real conditions. Night listening can support this process by reinforcing the identity you are trying to build. But it only becomes powerful when paired with daily behavior. Because your subconscious is constantly comparing what you hear, what you think, what you do. And the strongest repeated signal becomes your identity. Over time, the alignment between these signals becomes more consistent. And when consistency becomes strong enough, identity shifts. At that point, you no longer have to force behaviors. They become natural expressions of who you believe you are. This is the final stage of subconscious change. Not trying to act differently, but becoming someone for whom that behavior is normal. And once something becomes normal for your identity, it becomes automatic. This is why identity is the deepest level of change, because it governs all other levels. Thoughts, habits, emotions, actions, all flow from it. When identity changes, everything else follows more easily. Example: a person has always seen themselves as someone who gives up easily. Whenever they face difficulty, they stop quickly and return to comfort. One night they listen to a message about becoming persistent through small repeated effort. The next day, they do not suddenly transform. But they decide to continue working on something even after feeling frustrated. This is small but significant. Their old identity would have stopped immediately, but they continue. This creates a contradiction in their self-image. They repeat this behavior over several days. Each time they continue instead of quitting, they reinforce a new identity, someone who tries again. Slowly, their internal perception begins to shift. They no longer see themselves only as someone who gives up easily. They start seeing themselves as someone who can persist. This shift is not sudden. It is built through repeated action that conflicts with the old identity, and supported by continuous reinforcement. This is how identity is rewritten. And this is the deepest form of subconscious reprogramming. Conclusion: what one night really means for your subconscious mind. The idea that listening for just one night can reprogram your subconscious sounds powerful because it offers something people deeply want: a fast solution, a simple shift, a moment where everything changes. But after understanding how the mind actually works, the truth becomes clearer. One night is not a full transformation. It is a starting point. Your subconscious mind is not a system that resets instantly. It is a system built on repetition, experience, emotion, and identity. Everything you think repeatedly becomes familiar. Everything you do repeatedly becomes automatic. And everything you feel repeatedly becomes part of your emotional memory. This is how your internal world is shaped over time. So when you listen to something intentional for one night, you are not rewriting your entire mind. You are introducing a new direction. You are planting an idea that did not exist in the same form before. That idea may create awareness. It may create emotion. It may even create motivation. But on its own, it cannot replace years of conditioning. What it can do is begin a shift, a small but important shift in awareness. Because awareness is where change begins. Once you become aware of your patterns, you are no longer fully controlled by them. You gain a moment of choice. And that moment of choice is where everything changes. From that point forward, your life is shaped not by one night, but by what follows it. Your repetition. Your actions, your environment, your emotional responses, and your identity. These are the forces that determine your subconscious programming. Listening can guide you, but living reinforces you. Motivation can inspire you, but discipline builds you. Emotion can influence you, but action defines you. And identity ultimately decides what becomes permanent. The real lesson of this entire journey is simple. You are always being programmed. Not once, but constantly. By what you repeat, by what you consume, by what you tolerate, and by what you practice. So the question is never whether your subconscious is changing. The question is how it is changing, and in which direction. If one night of listening helps you shift direction even slightly, then it has value. But only if you continue, because transformation is not found in a single moment. It is found in continuation, in showing up again, in repeating the new behavior, in aligning thoughts with actions, and in building a new identity over time. That is how real subconscious change happens. Not overnight, but gradually. Not magically, but practically. And not from one night alone, but from everything you choose after it. The end.